So this next session is about job scopes and understanding how we look at a job in order to estimate labor. So up until now, we've been estimating costs. And as you can see by the marks, all of you have done a very good job. And we're going to talk about the final portion of that a bit later on at the end of this session. But today we're going to focus on calculating labor and what are the different parts and pieces of calculating labor. And in doing so, we have to understand a bit more about the project and what the project entails. So what we do is we take a look at the project. Now, an estimator, when it comes to labor, portion of it, is usually some individual that has a lot of experience with projects. Not only how they're constructed, the sequence of construction, the actual, how we put it all together, but also how long things take, approximately. Now, usually in a bigger office, there's several different crews. And over time, those crews are identified as to which ones specialize in which areas, which ones are very efficient in certain areas or do an excellent job or something like that. And they get closely identified to how long they take to do certain things. And so there's a tremendous amount of experience that goes on with estimating when it comes to crews, when it comes to labor. So what we're going to do today is there's a number of different elements we're going to look at. And we're all going to agree on how long these things take. I'll be giving the information. For the purposes of coming up with the same estimate, albeit each individual, based on their experience, would actually or more or less come up with a different number. But it doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter right now. It's a matter of understanding the process. So today we're going through the process. We're going to be using numbers, and the numbers are going to be typical for everybody, just so that we get the same results. And so this is the process we're going through. Now, this estimating process, when you're looking at your final capstone project, one of you or two of you or group collectively will be going through this together in order to come up with a estimated labor cost. Now, all of you are going to look at this and go, well, we don't know how to do this. It's an estimate or a guesstimate. It's to the best of our ability. Today, the process is more important than the accuracy of the content, only because most of us, unless some of you have been doing landscaping for 5 or 10 years, don't have the experience to come up with the numbers that we're going to be coming up with. So it's more of understanding the process. So don't get too flustered with, well, how did he get that many hours and that many people should be doing this job? We'll have a discussion, a bit of an open discussion about it, but ultimately the numbers that I come up with will be universal for everybody so that we get a sense of the project. So let's take, first of all, how we look at estimating. Well, what we do is we look at the job scope. We break down the job into its individual components, try to determine time and the number of people that are going to be involved in it. And then we're going to look at the crew. Basically, in this case, we have a 3-person crew. What are they getting paid? How do we allocate the work? And then we create a crew schedule. And that schedule is to help us determine how long the process is going to take and whether they can stay on that schedule. So it's a document or a series of documents that help us all to be on the same page. And in a lot of cases, the crew chief or the individual that heads the crew is part of the conversation to make sure that the estimated timelines and the crew capabilities are on track with the schedule. Okay? So there's a lot of parts and pieces to this thing, and there's a lot of people that are involved in it. So the first thing we need to do is look at the job scope. So a job scope is basically something that identifies what's going to happen. Okay? Now, in the case of the individuals that have posted on the jobs that I put online, I asked for each and every one of them to make sure that they also posted a job scope. Now, I don't read any of the content that they have there. I'm not in a position that I edit it. I'm not a go-between. I am simply facilitating a space for those different companies that want to post a job on the portal. That's all I'm doing. So when they put a job scope together, I have no idea what that really entails. That will be your responsibility to contact them and get a clear picture of what the job entails. In this case, when we're looking at estimating, we're looking at the project scope or the job scope. And this is the Carroll Brown residence that we've been looking at from day one, or I should say week 2. So we have fence posts, fence sections, gate, brick, fertilizer, crushed rock, edging, and shrubs. And the reason we're using this project is because you're familiar with it. You have some familiarity with the content of it, how many parts and pieces there are. So the next part of this is all new. That's this part as we're looking at this, and that refers to the crew. So the crew here, we have a 3-person crew. And each of the tasks, and we're going to identify the task and give the task names and numbers and break it down into elements and then sequence them to make sure they're right in sequence. Each of the tasks will require 1 or 2 people to perform. So we identify each task by saying, okay, this requires 2 people. This requires 1 person. And therefore, we can break down the tasks into who's going to be doing what at what time. However, all 3 can be working on a 1-person task at the same time. So, for instance, you look at shrubs. How many people does it take to plant a shrub? Well, that's an individual job. So you can either have 1 person planting all the shrubs, 2 people planting half the shrubs each, or 3 people planting a third of the shrubs each, or any combination of. It doesn't matter. So a shrubs operation is one of those things that has multiple variables to it, depending on how it fits the schedule. Follow? At any time you're not following what I'm discussing, just click on raise your hand. Okay? Therefore, I want to make sure that you kind of understand the sequence of thought. And that's really what's critical today, is that sequence of thought. All right. So the 3-person crew has a crew leader and 2 workers. So what does that mean? That simply identifies the fact that a crew leader is the individual that typically sits with the scheduler to manage the schedule, will come out with some sort of plan or pathway of how things are to be executed, and basically on job will give direction to who's doing what and when. And typically a crew leader is the person that has the most experience. They're paid the most, and in this case the crew leader gets $35 an hour, and the workers get $25 an hour. So the terminology is simply to identify who the individuals are. The crew leader in this case, as you can read here in the job scope, the crew leader must be involved in every 2-person task. Now why? Well, there could be hundreds of reasons why. Maybe it's a new crew, and so therefore the crew is inexperienced and the crew leader is teaching them along the way. There's all sorts of different reasons why. We just identify it that way, or I identify it that way in this particular task. So our task is to calculate the total manual hours first, and then try to even it out the hours allocated to each worker as evenly as we can. So the manual hours we'll refer to as MH. The manual hours is the manual labor portion of the project. So it has nothing to do with ordering or, picking something up from, local lumber yards or the local nurseries or anything like that. It's strictly the manual labor that's involved in these tasks. Okay? So how do we go about doing that? All right, let's take a look at this next section here. The first thing we do is determine the total number of manual hours and then divide it by 3 to determine the ideal hours allocated to each person. Therefore, we can create a chart that shows the following. And I've already made the chart for you. You really need to print it off because you're going to be writing on top of this. And that chart looks like What does this chart mean? Well, the crew chief or the crew leader, talking with the scheduler, has broken down the major components of the project. So they've determined, okay, there's no manual that you can go to and say this is how you break it down. They've determined based on experience how they're going to break down this series of tasks. So you'll have tasks name, you'll have time, how long does it take, and then the number of minimum people required for that task. So in this case, it's going to be 1 or 2. There's no task here that requires 3 people, although 3 people could be installing shrubs. It's simply identifying the minimum number of people. And then from there, we can calculate, and I'll show you how to do the calculation, the total of manual hours that are going to be allocated to that task. So this you need to print out, because I'm going to be writing all over top of this. So make sure you have a copy of this element. And then from there, we're going to determine the total gross hours that are required. From there, we're going to break it down to 3 individuals. From there, we're going to break it down to how much those individuals will get paid per hour. And therefore, we'll get a total estimated labor cost. That's what this sheet will help us with as we're going through the process. So please, please, please print it, okay? Because it is something that we will require. I lost where I was. Job scope, hold on. Okay. Now, the next step after we break that down, which we've done other than the calculation bit of it, is we have to determine what's called a critical path. So what is a critical path? The critical path establishes the order of events. Well, yes and no. It establishes prior events that need to occur. So, for instance, in here, the post must be in before the fence sections and the gate. That makes sense. You can't install a gate if you don't have a post, right? So this is what we're breaking down. Now, again, this is a simple project, so we must make sure that we kind of got the basics for this, and then, apply it to a larger scale project at a later date. The edging must be installed before the crushed rock and brick. Fertilizer should be installed when? At the end of the project, right? Once everything's completed, you basically want to do the fertilizer then, because nobody's going to be trampling all over everything, right? Shrubs can be installed at any time, but have to be installed before the fertilizer, okay? So that's the sequence of events that has been determined, typically by the crew chief along with the estimator. So the last part of this series of equations here is understanding payment. And that's what this section is here. It's a 3-person crew. Leslie, Stan, and Veronica. Leslie gets $35 an hour. Stan gets $25 an hour. And Veronica gets $25 an hour. So Stan and Veronica are what would be classified as workers, although all 3 of them are obviously workers. But the crew leader is Leslie. And that individual will get more paid because of their experience and everything else. So let's accept this. This is our job scope, our scenario for this particular project. Is there anything here that somebody didn't understand or would like me to elaborate on or anything like that? Because that's fine. We can do that.